Good morning, students. Welcome to our first lecture on disaster preparedness and planning management. So, the course is presented by me. My name is Dr. Vishal Kumar Nanoli. I have completed my PhD from NIT Patna in transportation engineering. So, let's start. So, what are the learning outcomes behind this lecture? So, after studying this particular lecture series, you will get to understand some basic concepts in disaster management. So, what is the disaster? What are the different types of risk? What is an earthquake? What are the causes behind an earthquake? What are the different types of measurements taken in the earthquakes? What is the Richter scale? Then you will be able to distinguish between avalanche and other natural phenomena. What is the lightning? What are the causes of the lightning? How does the flood occurs? What are the causes of the flood? And what does an impact do the flood do on our natural ecosystem? Then we will go and understand some basic definitions and terminologies related to the disaster management, because in a bit effective disaster management, the one thing which one should consider, or an engineer must be familiar with, that an effective communication between the disaster management authority and the stakeholder is very important for disseminating the correct information and for better use and planning of the resources available at hand at the time of disaster. So, what are the different terminologies like risk? What is vulnerability? What is a disaster and all? What is a danger? This type of the terms we will see in our upcoming lectures. Also, we will understand what are the types of disasters and what are the different categories of the disaster based on their natural occurrence. Either they are occurring due to the natural phenomena or are caused due to the anthropogenic activities caused by the human settlement. Thereafter we will study what are the challenges which are faced by the disaster, because whenever a disaster occurs in any country, it hampers both the economic condition as well as the life of the people are at stake, both of animal and humans. Because whenever a disaster occurs, disasters are basically a natural phenomena. Okay, when the natural phenomena becomes catastrophic and causes economic loss and the loss of the life of either human or animals, this phenomena is then called upon as disaster. So, whenever a country which faces a disaster or in which any disaster has occurred, there is severe economic loss of the country, as well as the country is poised to be slow in its economic growth. Now, what are the impacts of disaster in the major key skill areas, and how does it hamper the growth of a country, or a better management of the disasters can lead to better economic condition, as well as it also provides, if any country can tackle the disaster or can manage the disaster very effectively, then it opens the window for that country to leverage its knowledge and generate income from that knowledge from other world. So let's start with our topic. So, as you have seen, this type of the news are common in your newspapers, or you may be familiar with this type of the news which is trending in the newspaper or is the major headlines of the television. So, what is this? There, as you know that the most of the South Asian countries are very prone to the disaster, whether it is earthquake or tsunami or is the flood. For the case of the in India, as we consider that in India, the Bihar and Jharkhand, in India, Bihar, West Bengal, Assam, these are the places which are frequently drowned in the rainwater. Especially for Assam and for Bihar, the floods are synonym to the name of the state, because the states in these states, in especially in Bihar and Assam, floods are the very common disaster which causes both the damage to the human life as well as to the economic loss of the agricultural land. As the flood occurs, both the life of the people are at stake, as well as the agricultural activity which were conducted before the occurrence of the flood. This also gets hampered. Also, a large amount of valuable sediment gets washed away in these floods. So these are the very common phenomena, as you will find in some year back, around 3 to 4 years, there was a major flood which occurred in the city of the Patna. The main cause of this flood in the city of the Patna was the choking of the drainage system. Sometimes the choking of the drainage system also causes an artificial flood to occur, but the main reason for flood is the high amount of the rainfall occurring in the catchment area, as well as the ineffective drainage of the rainwater. So these are the very common phenomena which you will find across the country in the areas which are flood prone, that people are taking their animals, their objects or their vehicles from car to some other place by using the boats. So these are the very common images which you will find across the length and breadth of the country. So this type of the figure or this type of the images are very common in the day-to-day life. As you can see here, there in this particular street there is the waterlogging caused due to the heavy flood. Similar is the case with the this figure. In this particular figure, there is a landslide occurred, or washing away of the road has occurred due to the severe flood. People here are using the boats to navigate from one point to another in flood water. So in our first module, we will learn the introduction and concept and various definitions related to disaster. Okay, then what is a disaster, what is hazard, what is vulnerability, and what is the risk and severity, what is the frequency and its details, and capacity, impacts, prevention and mitigation. So before we start, so one should know that there is a disaster cycle. What is a disaster cycle? The disaster cycle is that the different type of the there are two types of the responses. First is the pre-disaster agenda. Pre-disaster agenda means before the occurrence of the disaster, what are the different steps which can be taken in order to lower the impact of disaster. That is, if any disaster occurs, then how can we reduce the impact of that disaster? So what are the preparations to be made is comes under the umbrella of pre-disaster agenda. And there is another response, or then another agenda which occurs after the disaster has occurred, which is known as post disaster response. So there are two type of responses. One is the pre disaster response and other is the post disaster response. So post disaster response occurs after the occurrence of the disaster, and pre disaster agenda occurs before the occurrence of the disaster. Now, in the pre-disaster agenda, what are the different aspects which we study? In the pre-disaster agenda, the basic is how emergency need is assessed. So, what are the assessment of the our capacity, for example, our amount of the beds in our hospital, number of the ambulance vehicles, as well as the first aid facility, as well as the number of the relief campus for the temporary or for the minor damage occurring. Also, how can we empower the people to adapt the risk mitigation protocols, or how the people can adapt various type of the techniques in order to lower the risk of the disaster. Then what are the early warning systems which we have developed, for example, for forecasting the floods to occur, the our rainfall forecast should be very accurate, so that before occurring of heavy rainfall, the meteorological department can effectively tell that at this particular point or at this particular junction, the amount of the rainfall will be higher than the annual average. So getting the information about higher rainfall, a proper exca excavation or a proper evacuation program can be planned very effectively. Also, for in case of the tsunamis and cyclones, early warning system will help to evacuate people from the cyclone or tsunami prone areas. Then what is the environmental improvement, how we can improve our environment? For example, in case of the flood, as we know that as the amount of the green cover increases, the occurrence of the flood or the impact of the flood reduces, because the green cover provides a blanket over the earth's flat surface, so that the erosion of the soil cannot take place, as well as it provides it acts as a protective layer which retards the heavy velocity of the falling water. So if we provide a so creation of the dam, small dams, I'm sorry for small dams, creation of the small dams, as well as increasing the forest cover and green cover, also increases the environmental improvement, as well as keeping the ecosystem very clean can also improve our and can also help in mitigating our disaster, as well as designing of the resilience buildings which are resilient to the disaster. For example, wind load, for example earthquake load and all. So by providing this type of the amenities or facilities, we can reduce the disasters. These are the pre-disaster agenda. Also, preservation, prevention, prediction and preparedness, how we can preserve the information, how we can preserve the information, our past information, as well as what are the different mechanism for collection of the information, as well as the model which we are adopting for prediction should be very reliable. So our prediction model should be very reliable, as well as whenever we get the information of regarding when we get the prediction about the any of the disaster, so what are the preventive measures which we can take in case of, what is the time gap between the information gained and the impact of the, that is the time interval between the information which we got, the time interval between the information about the disaster prediction and the disaster occurred is a very crucial, because this time window facilitates the stakeholder as well as planners or government agencies to take out proper prevention mechanism. What are our preparedness, how actually we are prepared in case if our predictions comes true. So how can we handle that situation in case of the disaster occur? What are our different preparedness? How, do we have first aid facility, do we have emergency facilities, do we have proper medical facilities, do we have proper evacuation facility? So this all comes under preparedness. Now post disaster, what post disaster is, after the disaster has occurred, how we will rescue the people, how we will rescue the animal life, then how can we provide the relief to the affected families or affected persons, then reconstruction of the particular infrastructure, and then the rehabilitation of the particular settlement. So these all comes under the disaster cycle. The disaster cycle is very important in the context also, so that if a civil engineer, for the civil engineer or for an a construction engineer, the particular engineer must know that what are the different types of the disaster natural phenomena which can cause heavy disaster to the structure, so that a proper disaster assessment can make the can help an engineer to design a proper disaster resilient building or disaster resilient infrastructure, so that the economic loss and the loss of the life can be minimized. Now introduction by the basic concept and definition. What is a threat? So A threat is a state of being exposed to a hazard, harm, injury, or damage. It is a source of danger. For example, a poisonous cobra is a threat to the man below who is attempting to catch it. Okay. So what is a threat? A threat is simply is an state of being exposed to a hazard or a harm. For example, if you are handling a snake, poisonous snake, so there is a very high probability that any bite of the snake can cause your life in grave danger. So this is a type of threat. Danger, what is the danger? The term danger means a state of being face to face with any kind of threat with the possibility of serious loss, injury, or death. Okay. Now there's a difference between a threat and a threat can be avoided. A threat can be avoided, but a danger cannot be avoided. For example, if you are moving your vehicle on a hilly road, so at the hilly road there are at many points or at many locations it is written as danger to overtake. Why it is written? Because any mistake taken at the point of overtaking can lead you to your vehicle to be seriously damaged or can lead your loss of the life at the on the hilly area. You maybe the vehicles be slipping and you may go into the valley, deep valley, and you can die. So a danger is a situation in which directly face any kind of the threat, so which is very problematic to your life. Now there are two type of disaster: natural disaster and man-made disaster. Then what are the natural disasters? The natural disasters are the catastrophic events with atmospheric, geological, seismological, volcanic, and hydrological origin. So whenever a disaster occurs due to the geological region, atmospheric region, seismological region, or volcanic region, then such type of the disasters are known as natural disasters. The natural disasters are very catastrophic in nature. That is, it means to say that they are very dangerous to the human life or to the animal life or for the nature. These type of the natural disaster cause very huge fatalities, property damage, and even societal, social, and environmental disruption. The example of the natural disasters are droughts, example, सूखा पड़ना, earthquake, floods, hurricane, landslide, and lightning. Now, according to the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, there are different terminologies. Okay, you must know this terminology of the United Nations Office also. First, what is a hazard? A hazard is a dangerous phenomena, substance, human activity, or condition that may cause loss of the life, injury, or other health impact, property damage, loss of the livelihood and services, social and economical disruptions, or environmental change. So, a hazard is a dangerous phenomena. What is a risk? A risk is a combination of the probability of the event and its negative consequences. So, if you will not study, you will fail. So, the failure of your in exam. So, any failure in the examination is a combination of what? Of your not studying and the negative impacts caused due to your failure. So, not studying in the exam is a taking a risk. Okay. Now, vulnerability, the characteristics and circumstances of a community, system, or asset that make it susceptible to the damaging effect of the hazard. For example, if we take the example of the tribal area, so any type of the uh, jungle fire or any type of the fire occurs in the would cause a very vulnerable conditions to the peoples living in the forest. So the people whose life are dependent on the forest, they are susceptible to be on vulnerable condition if there is any type of damage occurs to the forest area. Now, what is the capacity? The combination of the all strength, attributes, and resource available within a community, society, or organization that can be used to achieve agreed goal. So, the capacity can be said at what is the particular resources available, either a financial, manpower, or their natural resources, or their natural boundaries, which can be utilized by the community in order to prevent or in order to mitigate the disaster is known as capacity. Now, what is a disaster? A serious disruption of the functioning of a community or society involving widespread human, material, economic, and environmental loss and impact which exceeds the ability of the affected community or society to cope using its own resources. For example, we can say that the corona is also a type of pandemic, which is a type of disaster because it caused a serious disruption in the functioning of the communities worldwide. So in the next lecture, we are going to study about the concept of the hazard, risk, vulnerability and capacity. So for today's lecture, we will conclude to this point. Thank you. Thank you.